Sometimes life breaks us so completely that we think we'll never be whole again. Sometimes we discover that our deepest wounds become the very place where new life begins. Jarn Ormsson had lost everything: his ship, his crew, his honor. He bought an old abandoned hall in the forest with his last silver coins, hoping to disappear from a world that no longer wanted him. The place looked empty and forgotten, perfect for a broken man. But when he opened the door on his second morning, a pregnant young woman stepped out of the shadows. Her name was Liv. Her family had been killed in a raid, and she had been hiding in the hall, believing it was her safe place. Now they both claimed the same home, and neither would leave. What happens when two people who have lost everything find each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the ancient pines like the ghosts of better days, and Jarn Ormsson stood in the doorway of what he'd thought would be his final refuge, staring at the young woman who had just shattered his plans for solitude. She was perhaps 20 winters old, her dark hair braided simply, but her eyes holding the kind of steel that comes only from surviving the unthinkable. Her belly was round with child, perhaps 6 or 7 months along, and she held herself with the careful dignity of someone who had learned to be ready for anything. "You need to leave," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor he could hear beneath it. "This is my home." Jarn's hand instinctively moved to the leather pouch at his belt, the one that had held his last silver coins just 2 days ago. The empty pouch now felt heavier than when it had been full, weighted with the finality of his situation. He was a giant of a man, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders that had once carried the responsibility of leading 30 warriors into battle. Now those same shoulders carried only the burden of complete failure. "I have the deed," he said quietly, pulling the worn parchment from his cloak. "Bought it fair from old Magnus in the village. He said it had been empty for 3 years. The woman, Liv, she had said her name was Liv, looked at the document with the kind of careful attention that spoke of education. Not many common folk could read, but she studied the runes with clear understanding. Her jaw tightened as she read, and Jarn found himself studying her face. There was nobility in her features, the kind of refined bone structure that spoke of good bloodlines. What was a woman of quality doing alone in a forgotten hall? "Magnus had no right to sell what wasn't his," she said finally. "I've been living here since the last snow. This hall belongs to no one, which means it belongs to whoever needs it most." Jarn looked past her into the dim interior of the hall. What he could see in the morning light was both better and worse than he'd expected. The structure itself was sound. Whoever had built this place 3 generations ago had known their craft. The great supporting beams were carved from ancient oak, and the stone foundation showed no signs of cracking. But years of abandonment had taken their toll. Moss grew between the roof timbers, and he could see daylight through gaps in several places. The great hearth was cold and filled with old ashes, and the floor was scattered with debris from seasons of neglect. But there were also signs of recent habitation. A small area near the hearth had been swept clean, and he could see where someone had carefully arranged stones to create a smaller cooking area. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, and in one corner sat a collection of simple belongings: a worn wool blanket, a small iron pot, a wooden bowl polished smooth with use. "How long have you been alone?" he asked, the question coming out more gently than he'd intended. Something flickered across her face. Pain, quickly suppressed. "Since the raids in early spring. My father's hall was burned. My family—" She stopped, straightening her shoulders. "That's not your concern. The point is, I was here first. Jarn knew about raids. He'd led enough of them in his younger days, though he'd always prided himself on taking only what was needed and leaving women and children unharmed. The thought of this woman, pregnant and alone, fleeing from burning buildings and finding shelter in this forgotten place, stirred something in his chest that he'd thought had died with his honor. "I have nowhere else to go," he said simply. It was the truth, and somehow he sensed that truth was the only currency that would matter with this woman. "I spent everything I had left on this place. I came here to—" He paused, unsure how to explain that he'd come here to disappear, to fade away from a world that no longer had use for a disgraced ship captain. "To die," Liv said, and it wasn't a question. Her dark eyes studied his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. "You came here to give up." The accuracy of her assessment hit him like a physical blow. He had come here to die, not quickly or violently, but slowly and quietly, forgotten by the world that had once celebrated his victories. After the disaster at Stjernhall, the battle where his overconfidence had led his entire crew to their deaths, he'd found no place would take him. No Jarl would hire a captain whose judgment had failed so catastrophically. His reputation, once his greatest treasure, had become a curse. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but I paid for the right to do it here." Liv was quiet for a long moment, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Jarn could see her thinking, weighing options. When she spoke again, her voice held a different quality, still firm, but no longer hostile. "The hall is large enough for two people to avoid each other," she said finally. "If you insist on staying, we can share the space until the baby comes. After that," she shrugged, "we'll see what makes sense." It wasn't surrender, and it wasn't welcome, but it was pragmatic. Jarn found himself respecting her approach. "I can hunt," he offered, "and I know something about repairs. The roof needs work before the next storm." "I know about healing herbs and cooking," Liv replied, "and I can read and write if that's useful." They stood there in the doorway, two people who had lost everything, negotiating the terms of an arrangement that neither of them wanted, but both desperately needed. The morning sun had burned away the mist, and Jarn could see the hall more clearly now. It sat in a natural clearing, surrounded by ancient forest, with a small stream running nearby. The location was well chosen, defensible but hidden, with good hunting and fresh water. No wonder someone had built here generations ago. "There's something else you should know," Liv said, her voice dropping lower. "The local people think this place is cursed. That's why it's been empty so long. They say no one who stays here finds peace." Jarn looked at her, then at the dented war axe hanging from his belt, the only weapon he had left from his former life. "Good," he said. "I don't deserve peace." Something in his tone must have reached her, because her expression softened slightly. "Perhaps that's why we're both here," she said. "Perhaps cursed places are meant for cursed people." They spent the rest of the morning establishing a basic division of the space. The hall was indeed large enough for two people to coexist without constant contact. Liv had claimed the area near the great hearth, where she'd set up her small cooking space and sleeping area. Jarn chose a spot near the main door, partly for defense. Old habits died hard, and partly to give her the privacy she clearly valued. As he moved his few belongings into the hall, Jarn found himself stealing glances at Liv. She moved with the careful grace of someone in her condition, but there was something else in her movements, a watchfulness that spoke of long months of being afraid. When she thought he wasn't looking, her hand would drift to a small knife at her belt, and her eyes would dart toward the windows. "Who are you afraid of?" he asked as they shared a simple meal of barley porridge that evening. Liv was quiet for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The men who killed my family. They weren't just raiders looking for silver and cattle. They were hunting something specific." Her hand moved to her belly. "Someone specific." Jarn felt the familiar chill that came before battle, the heightening of senses that had kept him alive through 20 years of warfare. "You think they're still looking?" "I know they are." Liv's eyes met his across the small fire they'd built in the great hearth. "The question is whether they'll think to look here." As night fell over their strange new arrangement, Jarn lay on his bedroll near the door and listened to the sounds of the forest. He'd expected to spend his final days in complete solitude, wrestling with his failures and waiting for death to find him. Instead, he found himself sharing space with a pregnant woman who carried secrets as heavy as his own. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd come here to escape responsibility, to finally lay down the burden of protecting others. But as he listened to Liv's quiet breathing from across the hall, he realized that some burdens chose you rather than the other way around. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, and somewhere in the distance a wolf answered. The forest was alive with ancient rhythms, and for the first time in months, Jarn found himself thinking about tomorrow instead of dwelling on yesterday's failures. Perhaps the curse of this place wasn't about finding peace. Perhaps it was about finding something worth fighting for again. The first night in the hall passed with the awkward tension of two strangers forced into unwanted proximity. Jarn had positioned his bedroll near the great oak door, telling himself it was for defensive purposes, but the truth was simpler. He wanted to be able to leave quickly if his presence became too much of a burden. Liv had made her sleeping space near the hearth, where the dying embers provided both warmth and light. Between them stretched 20 feet of cold stone floor that might as well have been an ocean for all the distance it represented. Sleep came fitfully for both of them. Jarn lay listening to the small sounds that indicated another person's presence, the soft rustle of movement, the gentle rhythm of breathing, the occasional small sound of discomfort that spoke of a woman heavy with child, trying to find a comfortable position on a hard floor. These sounds, which should have been comforting reminders of human companionship, instead filled him with an odd mixture of protectiveness and panic. When dawn finally crept through the gaps in the shutters, Jarn rose quietly and stepped outside to relieve himself and gather his thoughts. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the forest around the hall was alive with the sounds of birds greeting the day. He'd always found peace in these quiet morning moments, but today his mind churned with questions he hadn't expected to face. He returned to find Liv awake and moving carefully around her small cooking area. She wore the same simple woolen dress from yesterday, but she'd rebraided her dark hair and washed her face with water from the bucket they kept near the door. In the morning light he could see more clearly the fine lines around her eyes that spoke of recent grief and the careful way she carried herself that suggested she was further along in her pregnancy than he'd first thought. "There's a barley for porridge," she said without looking at him directly. "And I found some late berries yesterday, if you're interested." "Thank you." He settled onto a low stool he'd fashioned from an old tree stump, maintaining the careful distance they'd established. "When is the baby due?" Liv's hand moved protectively to her belly. 2 months, perhaps less. It's hard to be certain without—" she paused. "Without the women who would normally help with such things." The loneliness in her voice struck him unexpectedly. Jarn knew little about childbirth, but he understood enough to know it wasn't meant to be faced alone. The thought of this woman, already carrying the weight of her family's death, preparing to bring a child into the world without any support, made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "I found this yesterday while I was exploring," Liv said, reaching into her bundle of belongings. She pulled out a delicate bone comb, carved with intricate patterns. "It was my mother's. She wore it on her wedding day and every feast day after. It's all I managed to save." Jarn looked at the comb, noting the fine craftsmanship and the worn smoothness that spoke of years of gentle use. "It's beautiful," he said, meaning it. "She would have wanted you to have it." "I'm not even sure why I took it," Liv continued, turning the comb over in her hands. "When the hall was burning and everyone was screaming, I just grabbed it. Everything else, the tapestries my grandmother wove, the silver my father earned in trade, the books my mother taught me to read from, all gone. But somehow I saved this little comb." She fell silent, and Jarn could see her struggling with emotions she kept carefully controlled. He wanted to offer comfort, but had no idea what words might help. His own experience with loss was too fresh, too raw to provide wisdom. "Sometimes we save the things that will matter most later," he said finally. "Even when we don't understand why at the time." Liv looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected such insight from a man she'd initially seen as a threat. "What did you save?" she asked. "When your world fell apart, what did you choose to keep?" Jarn's hand moved unconsciously to his belt, where his war axe hung. The weapon was battered and nicked from countless battles, its once bright blade darkened with age and use. It wasn't valuable. Any smith could make a better axe, but it had been his companion through 20 years of warfare. "This," he said, drawing the axe and laying it across his knees, "my first real weapon. My father gave it to me when I earned my place on my first ship. It's killed enemies and split wood and done 100 other jobs. Not worth much to anyone else, but it's part of who you are," Liv finished. "Or who you were." "Who I was," Jarn agreed. "I'm not sure who I am now." They ate their simple breakfast in companionable silence, and afterward Jarn set about examining the hall's condition more thoroughly. What he found was both encouraging and daunting. The basic structure was remarkably sound. Whoever had built this place had intended it to last for generations. The great oak beams showed no signs of rot, and the stone foundation was solid. But years of neglect had allowed smaller problems to accumulate into larger ones. The roof needed immediate attention. Several sections of thatch had blown away, leaving gaps that would become serious problems once the autumn rains began. The shutters hung crooked on leather hinges that had dried and cracked. The great hearth, while functional, needed cleaning and repair to draw properly. "This is going to be a lot of work," he told Liv, as she joined him in surveying the damage. "I've been doing what I can," she replied, and he could hear the defensiveness in her voice. "But there's only so much one person can manage, especially—" She gestured toward her belly. "I wasn't criticizing," Jarn said quickly. "I'm impressed by how much you've accomplished alone. I'm just thinking about what we'll need to do before winter." The word "we" hung in the air between them, heavier than either had expected. It represented a decision neither had consciously made, the acknowledgement that they would be facing the coming season together. "Why did you really come here?" Liv asked suddenly. "I understand that you lost everything, but there are other places a man could go to start over. Why choose a supposedly cursed hall in the middle of nowhere?" Jarn was quiet for a long moment, considering how much truth to share. "Because I wanted somewhere no one would follow me. Somewhere I could be forgotten. What did you do?" The question was asked gently, without judgment, but Jarn felt its weight nonetheless. "I was a ship captain, a good one for many years. I led successful raids, brought home silver and glory, earned respect from jarls and common warriors alike." The words felt strange in his mouth, like describing someone else's life. "Then I made a decision that got 30 good men killed, men who trusted me to bring them home safely." Liv was quiet, waiting for him to continue or not as he chose. "We were attacking a rival settlement, Stjernhall. Intelligence said they were weakly defended, that their warriors were away raiding. But I was wrong. It was a trap, and I led my men straight into it." Jarn's hands clenched involuntarily. "They fought like heroes trying to get out, but there was no escape. I was the only survivor, and only because I was knocked unconscious early in the battle. When I woke up, every man under my command was dead. That's why you came here to die," Liv said quietly. "You blame yourself for their deaths." "I'm responsible for their deaths," Jarn corrected. "A captain's first duty is to his crew, and I failed them completely." Liv was quiet for several minutes, one hand resting on her belly as if drawing comfort from the life growing within her. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "The men who killed my family came in the night like cowards. They murdered sleeping children and old people who had never raised a weapon against anyone. You made a mistake in battle, a real battle between warriors. These things are not the same. The outcome was the same. Good people died because of my choices. Good people die because of many things," Liv replied. "The question is what you do with the guilt afterward. Do you honor their memory by giving up, or do you find a way to make their sacrifice mean something?" Her words struck him with unexpected force. He'd been so consumed with his own shame that he'd never considered what his 30 dead warriors might have wanted him to do with his survival. That evening, as they shared another simple meal, a sudden storm struck the forest. Rain pounded against the hall's roof with increasing intensity, and soon water began dripping through one of the damaged sections above Liv's sleeping area. Without discussion, they both sprang into action. Jarn climbed up to stuff moss and cloth into the gap, while Liv moved her belongings to a dry area. They worked together with the easy coordination of people who understood that necessity trumped awkwardness. When the leak was temporarily patched and Liv's sleeping area relocated, they found themselves sitting closer together than they had since meeting, sharing the warmth of the fire and listening to the storm rage outside. "Tomorrow I'll start proper repairs on the roof," Jarn said. "We'll need more thatch, but there's good marsh grass by the stream. I can help gather materials," Liv offered. "And I know which herbs to collect before the first frost." They were planning together now, thinking ahead to winter preparation as a team. Neither commented on this shift, but both felt its significance. Somewhere between the storm and the shared work, they had moved from being two separate people occupying the same space to being partners in survival. As the fire burned low and they prepared for sleep, Liv spoke into the comfortable darkness. "I have nowhere else to go either," she admitted. "Even if you hadn't bought this place, I would have asked to stay. My family's lands are forfeit now, and I have no male relatives to claim protection from. When the baby comes, we'll both be completely dependent on charity or—" She didn't finish the thought, but Jarn understood. "Then we'll make this work," he said simply. "For as long as it needs to work. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the forest, but inside the hall, two lost souls had found something neither had expected, the possibility that broken things could be mended, even if they could never be made whole again. The days following the storm settled into a rhythm that surprised them both with its natural ease. Jarn woke before dawn, as was his habit from years of military life, and would slip quietly from the hall to check the surrounding forest. Old instincts died hard, and he found himself automatically scanning for signs of disturbance. Broken branches, unusual animal behavior, tracks that didn't belong. Satisfied that their refuge remained undiscovered, he would return to find Liv already stirring the fire and preparing their morning meal. She had claimed the large iron cooking pot as her domain, and Jarn was grateful to let her. His own culinary skills extended little beyond roasting meat over an open flame, or boiling whatever was available into an edible but unappetizing stew. Liv, however, seemed to possess an almost magical ability to transform their simple ingredients into meals that were both nourishing and surprisingly pleasant. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked one morning as she added wild herbs to their porridge, creating flavors he couldn't identify but found comforting. "My mother," Liv replied, stirring the pot with practiced movements. "She said a woman who could feed her family well would never lack for value, even in the hardest times." Her voice carried the wistfulness that always accompanied mentions of her family, but the sharp edge of fresh grief had begun to soften. "She was wise," Jarn said, accepting the wooden bowl she offered. "Though I suspect she taught you more than cooking." Liv smiled, a real smile, the first he'd seen from her. "She taught me to read and write, to recognize healing herbs, to manage a household. My father wanted sons to carry on his name, but he got only daughters. Mother made sure we could survive whatever the world threw at us. How many sisters did you have?" The question slipped out before Jarn could consider whether it was too painful to answer. "Two. Astrid was older than me, already married with children of her own. Sigrid was just 15. Liv's stirring motion slowed. "They lived in the main hall with their families. When the raiders came, they had no chance to run." Jarn felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt, the terrible arithmetic of who lives and who dies in moments of violence. "You survived because you were somewhere else?" "I was in the birthing hut with our thrall woman, Greta. She was having her third child, and the labor was difficult. I stayed to help because I have some skill with herbs and healing." Liv's voice became very quiet. "If I had been in the main hall that night, I would have died with the rest of them. Instead, I watched it burn from the forest while Greta held her newborn son. The weight of that survival, of being spared by chance while her entire family perished, hung between them. Jarn understood it intimately, the way random circumstance could make the difference between life and death, and how the living were left to make sense of why they had been spared. What happened to Greta and her baby? I helped them reach her brother's family 2 days' journey south. She begged me to come with her, but Liv shrugged. I couldn't leave, not yet. I needed to see who had done this, to understand why. And did you? Understand why? Liv was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly. Perhaps. Though understanding doesn't make it hurt less, their conversations during meals had become one of the unexpected pleasures of their strange arrangement. Both had been educated beyond the common level. Jarn through military service, under Jarls who valued tactical intelligence. Liv through a mother who had insisted her daughters learn everything she could teach them. They found themselves discussing everything from the best techniques for smoking meat to the old stories of gods and heroes. After breakfast, they would separate for their daily tasks. Jarn had taken responsibility for the heavier physical labor, repairing the roof, reinforcing the door and shutters, gathering firewood for the approaching winter. He attacked these projects with the methodical thoroughness of a military campaign. Working systematically through each problem until it was properly solved, Liv focused on tasks better suited to her condition and skills. She tended the small herb garden she had started in a protected corner near the hall, gathering and drying plants that would be essential for cooking and healing through the winter months. She also took charge of organizing their limited supplies, creating storage systems that would protect their food from mice and moisture. It was during one of these organizational projects that Jarn realized just how thoroughly she had transformed the neglected hall into something approaching a home. The area around the great hearth, which had been cold and abandoned when he first saw it, now felt warm and welcoming. Liv had arranged their few possessions with an eye for both function and beauty, creating small touches that spoke of care and permanence. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters in pleasing arrangements that filled the air with subtle fragrances. Their wooden bowls and simple eating implements were stored in a way that made them easily accessible, but also created a sense of order. Even their sleeping areas, though separated by mutual agreement, felt like parts of a cohesive whole, rather than two camps sharing neutral territory. "You have a gift for this," Jarn told her one afternoon. Gesturing toward the transformed space, Liv looked up from where she sat, weaving grass into rope for repairs. "For what?" "Making a place feel like home. I've lived in barracks and ship cabins and temporary camps, but I've never been anywhere that felt like this." She considered his words seriously. "My mother said that home isn't a place, it's a feeling. You create it by putting care into daily things, by making beauty wherever you can find it." She held up her rope weaving. "Even work can be made pleasant if you approach it right." Jarn found himself watching her hands as she worked, noting the precise, economical movements that spoke of someone who had been taught to do things properly from childhood. There was something deeply appealing about her competence, her ability to find purpose and meaning in simple tasks. "You were born to wealth," he observed. It wasn't a question. He'd seen enough of the world to recognize the signs. "My father was a successful trader and landowner," Liv confirmed. "We lived well, though not extravagantly. He believed in investing in his daughter's education rather than just their dowries. Yet you know how to do everything needed for survival. Most wealthy women would be helpless in circumstances like these." Liv's expression grew thoughtful. "My mother grew up poor. She never forgot what it meant to have nothing, and she made sure we wouldn't be helpless if fortune turned against us. She was right to prepare us, though I don't think she imagined circumstances quite like these." Their afternoon routines often overlapped as the day grew later. Jarn would return from his outdoor work to find Liv preparing the evening meal, and he would settle nearby to maintain his weapons or work on smaller repair projects. These quiet hours had become precious to both of them, time when they could simply exist in each other's company without the need for constant conversation or explanation. It was during one of these peaceful interludes that Liv first spoke. "About the baby's movements. She's active today," she said. One hand pressed against her belly. "I think she dislikes the change in weather." "She?" Jarn asked. "I hope it's a daughter. The world is hard enough for women, but at least daughters can't be forced into battles they have no hope of winning." Jarn considered this, thinking of his own experiences with violence and warfare. Perhaps by the time she grows up, the world will be different. Perhaps, Liv agreed, though her tone suggested she didn't entirely believe it. But I'll prepare her for the world as it is, not as I wish it could be. As autumn deepened around their forest refuge, both Jarn and Liv began to realize that their temporary arrangement was becoming something neither had expected, a partnership built on mutual respect and growing trust. They were two people who had lost everything, learning to build something new from the pieces that remained. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Jarn began working on a project he told himself was purely practical. He had found suitable wood, seasoned ash from a tree that had fallen years ago, and started carving. His hands, more accustomed to wielding weapons than crafting furniture, moved slowly and carefully as he shaped the pieces. Each evening after their meal, he would retreat to a corner of the hall with his knife and the growing collection of wooden components. Liv noticed immediately, of course. She was too intelligent and observant to miss the quiet scraping sounds, or the way he carefully swept the wood shavings into the fire each night. But she said nothing, perhaps understanding that this project needed to remain unspoken to maintain its innocence. The truth was that Jarn couldn't quite explain to himself why he was making a cradle. The logical part of his mind insisted it was simply the practical thing to do. Liv would need somewhere safe for the baby to sleep, and he had the skills to provide it. But there was something deeper at work. Something that had awakened during their quiet evening conversations and shared domestic routines. For the first time since the disaster at Stjernhall, he found himself thinking about the future instead of dwelling on past failures. The baby, Liv's baby, had become real to him in a way that surprised him. When she mentioned the child's movements, or placed her hand protectively over her belly, Jarn felt a strange stirring of protective instincts he hadn't known he possessed. The cradle took shape slowly. He carved the rockers first, making sure they were perfectly balanced to provide gentle motion without the risk of tipping. The sides came next, crafted with joints his father had taught him decades ago. Each piece had to fit perfectly with the others, creating something that would be both beautiful and completely safe for a small life. "What are you making?" Liv finally asked one evening, though her tone suggested she already knew. Jarn's hands stilled on the piece he was sanding smooth. "A cradle," he admitted. "For the baby." Liv was quiet for a long moment, and when he looked up, he saw her eyes were bright with unexpected tears. "You don't need to—" "I want to," he interrupted gently. "A child should have a proper place to sleep." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and returned to her own evening work, mending a tear in her wool cloak. But Jarn noticed that she glanced over at his project more frequently now, no longer pretending not to see. Their daily routines had evolved beyond mere practicality into something that resembled genuine companionship. The morning meal had become a time for planning the day's work and sharing observations about the weather or the forest around them. Jarn would describe tracks he'd seen during his morning patrol, the deer path that led to good hunting, the signs that winter would come early this year. Liv would share her knowledge of which plants to gather before the first frost, which roots could be stored to provide nutrition through the lean months. "You know this forest well, for someone who's only been here a few months," Jarn observed one morning, as Liv directed him toward a grove where the best nuts could be gathered. "I had to learn quickly," she replied. "When you're alone and pregnant, you don't have the luxury of making mistakes about food or shelter." Her competence continued to impress him. She had transformed their limited resources into genuine comfort through careful planning and patient work. Their meals, while simple, were consistently nourishing and flavorful. Their living space stayed clean and organized despite the ongoing repair work. Most remarkably, she had begun teaching him things he'd never expected to learn. "These leaves make a tea that helps with pain," she explained one afternoon, showing him how to identify a particular plant. "And this bark, when prepared correctly, can stop bleeding faster than anything else. How do you know so much about healing?" he asked. "My mother's mother was known for her skill with herbs." The knowledge passed down through the women of our family. Liv smiled at the memory. Mother said it was more valuable than any dowry because it could never be stolen or lost. Jarn found himself genuinely interested in this knowledge, not just because it might prove useful, but because it was part of who Liv was. He discovered she could read not only the common runes, but also some of the older symbols used for recording healing lore. Her mind held a library of information about plants, seasons, and the natural world that complemented his own knowledge of hunting and survival. Their conversations during these teaching moments often wandered into deeper territory. They spoke about their childhoods, their families, their beliefs about honor and duty, and the way the world worked. Jarn was surprised to find that Liv's perspective on many things differed significantly from his own, shaped by her experience as a woman and her family's emphasis on trade and negotiation rather than warfare. You think differently than most people I've known, he told her one evening as they shared the last of their summer berries. How so? Most of the men I've served with saw the world in terms of strength and weakness, winning and losing. You see connections, possibilities for cooperation that wouldn't occur to them. Liv considered this. Women have to think differently. We rarely have the option of solving problems through violence, so we learn other ways, such as patience, compromise, finding solutions that benefit everyone instead of just the strongest. She glanced at him, like what we've done here. Two people with competing claims to the same place, figuring out how to share it instead of fighting over it. Jarn realized she was right. In his former life, such a situation would likely have been resolved through combat or the threat of it. The stronger would have driven off the weaker, and that would have been the end of it. Instead, they had created something new, a partnership that made both of them stronger than either had been alone. I never thought of it that way, he admitted. Men rarely do, Liv said, but without malice. You're taught to see everything as a contest to be won. Sometimes the better solution is to change the rules entirely. As the baby's movements became more pronounced, Jarn found himself increasingly fascinated by the miracle of new life growing within Liv. She would sometimes place her hand over a particularly strong kick, and he could see the amazement in her face at this evidence of the child she carried. Does it hurt? He asked one evening when the baby seemed especially active. Sometimes, but it's also wonderful. Like carrying hope itself inside you. She looked at him thoughtfully. Would you like to feel? The question surprised him. Such intimacy seemed to cross a line they had carefully maintained. But curiosity and a strange longing won over caution. If it's appropriate, he said quietly. Liv guided his large hand to a spot on her belly where the baby was moving. For a moment, there was nothing. And then he felt it, a firm push against his palm that was unmistakably alive and purposeful. The sensation hit him with unexpected force. This wasn't just Liv's baby anymore. It was a real person, already fighting and striving and demanding space in the world. In that moment, something shifted inside Jarn that he couldn't name or explain. She's strong, he said softly. Yes, Liv agreed, her voice equally quiet. She'll need to be. That night, as Jarn worked on the cradle's final details, he understood that he was no longer making something for Liv's baby. Somehow, without his conscious decision, the child had become important to him personally. He was preparing for the arrival of someone he already cared about, someone whose safety and comfort mattered to him as much as his own. The cradle was nearly finished now, smooth and sturdy and beautiful in its simplicity, like their unlikely partnership. It had grown from necessity into something that felt both natural and precious, a symbol of the new life they were building together in their forgotten corner of the world. The morning that changed everything began like any other. Jarn was clearing debris from around the hall's foundation, preparing to reinforce the stone base before winter, when his shovel struck something that rang with a metallic sound. Curious, he dug more carefully and uncovered what appeared to be a large stone, carved with runes, but not just any runes. These were old symbols, the kind used in sacred places generations ago. Liv, he called, excitement evident in his voice. Come see this. She approached carefully, one hand supporting her back as the baby's weight made movement increasingly difficult. When she saw what he had uncovered, her eyes widened with recognition and something approaching awe. "It's a foundation stone," she breathed, kneeling awkwardly to trace the carved symbols with her fingertips. This place was built as a sanctuary. Jarn watched her read the ancient runes, noting the way her expression shifted from curiosity to wonder to something like reverence. "What does it say?" "It's a blessing and a protection," Liv translated slowly. "Here shall the lost find shelter, the broken find healing, and the wronged find justice. By Thor's hammer and Frigg's wisdom, let this place stand as refuge for those who have nowhere else to turn." They stared at each other across the carved stone, both understanding the significance of what they had discovered. This wasn't just an abandoned hall. It was a place that had been specifically consecrated as a sanctuary for people exactly like them. "That explains why it's been empty," Jarn said quietly. "People avoided it not because it was cursed, but because they respected what it was meant to be. And why we both ended up here," Liv added. "Two people with nowhere else to go, finding the one place that was meant for people like us." The discovery changed something fundamental about how they saw their situation. They were no longer two strangers sharing space by unfortunate circumstance. They were fulfilling the ancient purpose of this place, carrying on a tradition of sanctuary that stretched back generations. That evening, as they sat by the fire, with the foundation stone cleaned and respectfully covered near the hearth, their conversation took on a different quality. The formal politeness that had characterized their early interactions gave way to genuine intimacy, as if the ancient blessing had given them permission to be truly honest with each other. "Tell me about your family," Liv said. "Not the tragedy at Stjernhall, but before that." "What were they like?" Jarn was quiet for a long moment, unused to talking about personal matters. "My father was a good man," he said finally. "Honorable, steady, never broke his word. He fought when he had to, but preferred to solve problems through negotiation when possible." "Like you've done here," Liv observed. "Perhaps. Though I think I learned that approach from you rather than him." Jarn smiled slightly. "My mother died when I was young, so father raised me alone. He taught me to fight, to lead men, to make decisions under pressure. But he also taught me that strength without wisdom is just destruction. Is that why you blame yourself so much for what happened? Because you feel you failed his teachings?" The question cut deep, but Jarn found he could answer it honestly. "Partly." He always said, "A leader's first responsibility is to the people who follow him." When I led those men into that trap, I violated everything he'd taught me about protecting those under my command. Liv was quiet for several minutes. Her hands folded over her belly where the baby moved restlessly. "My father would have liked your father," she said finally. "He believed in the same principles: honor, responsibility, protecting the weak." "Tell me about him." "He started with nothing," Liv said, her voice warm with memory. "Just a small boat and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. He built his wealth through fair dealing and clever trading, never through violence or exploitation. Mother said he could talk a wolf out of eating sheep. What did he trade in? Everything. Furs from the north, amber from the coast, silver from the southern kingdoms. But mostly he traded in trust. People knew that if Olaf Eriksson gave his word on a deal, it was as good as silver in their hands." Jarn could hear the pride in her voice, and the pain of loss that still accompanied it. "He sounds like a remarkable man." He was, and he would have been a wonderful grandfather. Her hand moved protectively over her belly. "He was already making plans for the baby's future before—" She stopped, unable to finish. "The people who killed your family," Jarn said carefully. "You said they were hunting something specific. What did they want?" Liv was silent for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My father wasn't just a successful trader. He was also a trusted advisor to Jarl Magnus of Nordberg. When the Jarl died without a male heir, father supported his daughter Ingrid's claim to rule. But there were others who wanted the position for themselves, and they saw your family as threats to their ambition. More than that, my father had evidence of their treachery, documents, witness accounts, proof that they had been undermining the Jarl for years. The night they came for us, they weren't just eliminating political opponents. They were destroying evidence that could have seen them all hanged. Jarn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Do you think they got what they were looking for? I don't know. Father kept his most important papers in a hidden compartment, but I never had a chance to check if they found it. Liv's voice grew smaller. I just ran. While my family burned, I ran and hid like a coward. You survived, Jarn said firmly. That's not cowardice, that's wisdom. If you had tried to fight, you would have died with the rest of them, and your child would have died too. Your father would want you to live, to carry on his bloodline and his values. Would he? Sometimes I think he would be ashamed of me for not dying with honor alongside my family. Jarn reached across the space between them and gently took her hand. No honorable father would want his pregnant daughter to throw her life away in a hopeless fight. Your survival means his grandchild has a chance at life. That's what would matter to him. Liv's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't pull her hand away. I've been so afraid, she admitted, not just of being caught, but of being unworthy of the love my family gave me, of failing to be the daughter they raised. You are exactly the daughter they raised, Jarn said with quiet conviction. Strong enough to survive alone, skilled enough to thrive in impossible circumstances, brave enough to trust a stranger when you had every reason to fear him. They would be proud of who you've become. That night, as they prepared for sleep, something had shifted between them again. The careful emotional distance they had maintained was crumbling, replaced by genuine affection and mutual respect. They were no longer just two people sharing space. They were two people who cared about each other's well-being and happiness. As Jarn settled onto his bedroll near the door, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow in a way he hadn't experienced since before Stjernhall. For the first time in months, he was thinking about building something rather than simply surviving. The foundation stone's blessing seemed to have awakened possibilities he hadn't dared to imagine. Across the hall, Liv lay listening to the gentle sounds of Jarn preparing for sleep, the quiet rustle of blankets, the soft exhalation as he settled. These sounds, which had once made her nervous with their reminder that she was not alone, now brought comfort and security. The ancient sanctuary was fulfilling its purpose, providing refuge for the lost and healing for the broken. What neither of them yet realized was how completely they had begun to heal each other. The days following their discovery of the foundation stone carried a different energy. Jarn found himself working with renewed purpose on the hall's restoration, no longer simply making repairs, but actively creating something worthy of the sanctuary's ancient blessing. Liv moved through her daily routines with increased confidence, as if understanding the hall's true nature had given her permission to truly make it home. It was during one of these purposeful work sessions that Jarn made a decision that surprised even him. From beneath his travel pack, he withdrew something he had kept hidden since arriving, a leather cord bearing a small silver hammer pendant, worn smooth by generations of handling. This was my father's, he said, showing it to Liv as they shared their evening meal. His father gave it to him and his father before that. It's supposed to represent Thor's protection, but also the responsibility that comes with strength. Liv studied the pendant with the careful attention she gave to anything of significance. The silver gleamed dully in the firelight, and she could see the tiny runes carved around its edges. It's beautiful, she said. Why are you showing it to me now? Jarn was quiet for a moment, turning the pendant over in his large hands. Because I've been thinking about legacy, about what makes a man worthy of his ancestors' memory. He looked up at her. When I failed at Stjernhall, I felt like I had broken faith with everything this represents. But being here, working alongside you, preparing for your child's arrival, it's made me wonder if worthiness isn't just about avoiding failure. What else could it be about? Building something good, protecting something precious, being the kind of man who creates rather than just destroys. He hesitated, then continued. I want to be worthy of this pendant again, not through great deeds in battle, but through smaller acts of honor. Liv felt something warm expand in her chest at his words. The vulnerability in his admission touched her deeply. Here was a man who had been a celebrated warrior, now finding meaning in domestic tasks and caring for people who needed protection. "I think your father would be proud of the man you've become," she said softly. "The man who carved a cradle for a stranger's baby, who shared his last safe refuge with someone who needed it, who works every day to make a broken place whole again." Their conversation was interrupted by a strong kick from the baby that made Liv gasp and place both hands on her belly. "She's active tonight," Jarn observed, and Liv noticed that he'd begun referring to the baby as she without conscious thought. "Very active. I think she's running out of room in there." Liv rubbed the spot where the baby had kicked. "Would you like to feel again?" "She seems to respond to voices other than mine." This time Jarn didn't hesitate. He placed his hand gently where Liv indicated and spoke quietly toward her belly. "Easy there, little warrior. Save your strength for when you need it." As if responding to his voice, the baby moved again, a firm push against his palm that seemed almost deliberate. "She knows you," Liv said with wonder. "She recognizes your voice." The intimacy of the moment, his hand on her belly, both of them connected to the life growing within her, should have felt strange or inappropriate. Instead, it felt natural, like the completion of something that had been building between them for weeks. "What will you name her?" Jarn asked, not moving his hand. "I've been thinking about that. My mother's name was Astrid, but that was my sister's name too. I want something that honors my family but gives her a fresh start." Liv paused. "What do you think of Freydis?" "It means noblewoman and peaceful." "Freydis," Jarn repeated, testing how it sounded. "I like it. Strong but feminine. A name for someone who will make her own way in the world." They worked together on a major project the next day, reinforcing the hall's main door and adding proper hinges that would allow it to be barred from inside. It was work that required coordination and communication, and they moved together with the easy efficiency of people who had learned to anticipate each other's needs. "Hand me that crossbeam," Jarn said, and Liv had it ready before he finished speaking. "Hold this steady while I mark the position," she requested, and his hands were already in place. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and observations that had nothing to do with their tragic pasts. Liv told him about the traveling merchants who used to visit her father's hall, bringing news and goods from distant lands. Jarn described the different ports he had visited during his years as a ship captain, the varieties of people and customs he had encountered. "Have you ever been to the southern kingdoms?" Liv asked as they took a break to rest and share water. "Several times. The people there build in stone instead of wood, and their warriors fight differently than ours. More discipline, less individual heroics." Jarn wiped sweat from his forehead. "Their women have more freedom too. I saw female merchants conducting business on their own, speaking for themselves in negotiations." "That sounds appealing," Liv said wistfully. "Sometimes I think about what life might be like in a place where a woman's value isn't measured only by her ability to produce sons and manage a household. You would thrive anywhere," Jarn said with conviction. "Your intelligence and skills would be valued in any culture." As afternoon faded toward evening, Liv's energy began to flag noticeably. The baby's increasing size was making even simple tasks more difficult, and Jarn found himself taking over responsibilities that had previously been hers. "You don't need to do everything," she protested as he prepared their evening meal. "I want to," he replied. "You should rest when you need to. Taking care of yourself is taking care of the baby." The domestic intimacy of cooking for her, of taking responsibility for her comfort and well-being, felt both natural and profound. Jarn realized he had begun thinking of Liv and the baby as his family, not in any legal or formal sense, but in the deeper way that mattered most. "Jarn," Liv said as they finished eating, her voice unusually hesitant. "Yes? What happens after the baby comes? Have you thought about that?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither had been willing to address directly. Their arrangement had always been temporary, defined by immediate necessity rather than long-term planning. "I've thought about it," Jarn admitted.
Have you?
"Every day. I know I can't stay here indefinitely. Eventually, people will start asking questions, and it's not safe for any of us if we're discovered. But—" Liv looked across the fire at him, her expression vulnerable in a way he'd rarely seen. "But I don't want to leave. This place, this life we've built together, it feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has." "Then don't leave," Jarn said quietly. "Stay, let me help you raise Freydis. Let us be a family, whatever form that takes." The words hung in the air between them, an offer that changed everything. Not marriage exactly, not yet, but something deeper, a commitment to shared future, to building something permanent together. "You would want that?" Liv whispered. "Even though she's not your child?" "She feels like my child," Jarn replied honestly. "You both feel like my family. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay and be part of her life." Across the dying fire, two people who had lost everything looked at each other and saw the possibility of having everything that truly mattered. Not wealth or status or revenge, but love and safety and the chance to build something beautiful together. The morning that shattered their fragile peace began with Jarn's usual patrol of the forest surrounding their sanctuary. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter's approach. He moved quietly through the familiar paths, noting the tracks of deer and smaller game, checking the snares he had set near the stream. It was near the old oak, where he sometimes rested during these rounds, that he found the first sign that their world was about to change. A circle of stones, arranged around the cold ashes of a recent campfire, not more than 2 days old, judging by the smell and the way the ashes had settled. Someone had camped within half a day's walk of their hall. Jarn's warrior instincts, dormant for months, awakened with jarring suddenness. He circled the campsite carefully, reading the story told by disturbed earth and broken twigs. 3 men, possibly 4. They had arrived from the south and stayed one night before moving on toward the northeast. But it was what he found at the edge of the camp that made his blood run cold. Caught on a low branch, as if torn away during hasty movement, was a piece of fabric, wool dyed deep red and woven with a distinctive pattern. Quality work, the kind worn by wealthy men or professional warriors. More troubling still, the fabric bore stains that looked suspiciously like old blood. Jarn carefully wrapped the cloth fragment and hurried back toward the hall, his mind racing through possibilities. Travelers were rare in these deep woods, and armed men even rarer. The fact that they had camped so close to the sanctuary but hadn't approached it suggested either that they didn't know it was occupied, or that they were being deliberately cautious. He found Liv in the small garden area she had cultivated, moving slowly as she gathered the last herbs before the first frost. Her pregnancy had advanced enough that simple tasks required careful planning and frequent rest. She looked up with a smile as he approached, but the expression faded when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "We may have visitors," Jarn said carefully, not wanting to alarm her unnecessarily. "I found evidence of a recent camp nearby. Armed men traveling toward the northeast." Liv's hand moved instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture that had become automatic. "How recent?" 2 days, perhaps 3. Jarn showed her the fabric fragment. "They might be simple travelers, but—" Liv took the cloth with trembling fingers, and the color drained from her face so quickly that Jarn stepped forward to steady her. "You know this pattern," he said. "It wasn't a question. Red wool with silver threads," she whispered. "It's expensive, distinctive. Only wealthy men can afford it." She looked up at him with eyes full of terror. "Björn the Black wore a cloak exactly like this when he came to our hall that night. He was proud of it, said it was a gift from Jarl Eriksson himself." The name hit Jarn like a physical blow. Björn the Black was known even in distant ports as a ruthless warrior who took contracts that other men wouldn't touch. If he was in these woods, it wasn't by coincidence. "Tell me everything," Jarn said urgently. "Why would he be hunting you specifically?" Liv sank onto the wooden stool they kept by the garden, her breathing quick and shallow. They told you my father supported Jarl Magnus's daughter Ingrid when the old Jarl died. But there's more I didn't say." She paused, struggling to find words. "My father wasn't just an advisor. He was Ingrid's betrothed." Jarn felt the world shift around him as the implications became clear. "Which makes you the widow of the rightful heir to Nordberg's throne," Liv finished. "Legally, I never married my father. We were only betrothed. But in the eyes of many, I carry the legitimate claim to the Jarl's lands and title, and your child would be the next in line." Liv's voice was barely audible. "If Freydis is a boy, he would have a stronger claim than any of the usurpers who killed my family. If she's a girl, she could still be married strategically to unite the legitimate bloodline with another powerful family." The political realities crashed over Jarn like a cold wave. This wasn't just about a pregnant woman hiding from raiders. This was about succession to one of the most powerful jarldoms in the region. Liv wasn't just carrying a baby. She was carrying the future of an entire territory. "How many people know about your condition?" he asked. "I don't know. The attack came so suddenly, and I've been in hiding ever since. But if Björn is here, someone must have told him where to look." Jarn's mind worked through the tactical situation with the cold efficiency that had once made him a successful military leader. Björn wouldn't be traveling alone. He was too smart for that. He would have brought enough men to handle any resistance, and he would be systematic in his search. "We need to prepare for the possibility that he finds us," Jarn said. "How many men would he typically travel with?" "At least 6, maybe more. All experienced fighters, all loyal to whoever is paying them." Liv's voice grew stronger as she focused on practical details rather than fear. "But Jarn, you don't understand what you're offering to fight. These aren't simple raiders. Björn has killed kings and jarls. He's never failed to complete a contract." "Then perhaps it's time his record was broken," Jarn replied grimly. For the first time since Stjernhall, he felt the familiar stirring of battle readiness, not the bloodlust that had driven his younger self, but the calm determination of a protector facing a clear threat. These men wanted to hurt Liv and her unborn child. That made them his enemies, regardless of their reputation or skill. "There's something else," Liv said, her voice growing even quieter. "The night they killed my family, Björn said something to my father before." She stopped, unable to finish. "What did he say?" "He said, 'Where is the girl with the silver hair?' He wasn't just there to eliminate my family, he was specifically hunting for me. And when they didn't find me in the main hall, he ordered his men to search the entire settlement." Jarn felt ice form in his stomach. "Silver hair?" Liv touched her dark braids self-consciously. "I was born with hair almost white blonde, like my mother's mother. I started dyeing it darker when I reached marriageable age because father thought it made me too conspicuous. But people remember unusual features. Someone told him what you looked like. Someone who knew you well enough to describe you accurately. It had to be someone from court. Someone who had access to both Björn and detailed information about our family." Liv's eyes filled with tears of rage rather than fear. "Someone I trusted betrayed us to our killers." The betrayal cut deep, Jarn could see. It was one thing to be hunted by enemies. It was another to be sold by friends. But there would be time for emotional processing later. Right now, they needed to focus on survival. "How long until the baby comes?" he asked. "Weeks, not days. But the birthing could start at any time." Liv looked around their peaceful garden, their comfortable home, with the desperation of someone who knew she might be seeing it for the last time. "We could run. Pack everything we can carry and head deeper into the forest. You're in no condition for hard travel, especially if the birth starts while we're on the road," Jarn said. "And Björn would track us eventually. Men like him don't give up. Then what do you suggest?" Jarn looked toward the hall they had worked so hard to restore, the sanctuary that had become their home and refuge. The ancient foundation stone's blessing echoed in his mind. "Let this place stand as refuge for those who have nowhere else to turn." "We make our stand here," he said firmly. "This place was consecrated as a sanctuary. It's defensible, we know the terrain, and you'll be safe during the birthing. If Björn wants you, he'll have to come through me to get you." Liv stared at him with a mixture of gratitude and terror. You would do that? Face Björn the Black and his men to protect us? I failed to protect my men at Stjernhall, Jarn said quietly. I won't fail to protect my family here. The word family hung between them with new weight. In the face of mortal danger, the careful boundaries they had maintained suddenly seemed meaningless. They were bound together now, by more than convenience or affection. They were bound by love and the desperate need to protect what they had built. Then we prepare for war, Liv said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. As they walked back toward the hall, both knew their time of peace was ending. The bloodied cloak fragment in Jarn's pocket seemed to burn against his skin, a reminder that the violence they thought they had left behind was coming to find them in their sanctuary. But they also knew something else. They would not face it alone. The transformation of their peaceful sanctuary into a fortress began immediately. Jarn moved with the methodical precision of a military commander, his months of domestic tranquility falling away like a discarded cloak as the warrior within him awakened fully. But this time his strategic mind was focused not on conquest or glory, but on the desperate mathematics of protecting the two people who had become his entire world. His first priority was retrieving weapons and armor he had hidden upon arriving at the hall. From a carefully concealed cache beneath the floor stones near his sleeping area, Jarn unearthed the tools of his former trade. His battle armor emerged piece by piece, mail shirt of interlinked iron rings, leather braces reinforced with metal studs, a round shield painted with his personal symbol of a raven in flight. Each piece bore the scars of old battles, but had been maintained with the care of a professional who understood that his life might depend on their reliability. I thought you had given up fighting, Liv observed as she watched him don the familiar armor. Even pregnant and frightened, she moved efficiently to help him with buckles and straps she had no experience fastening. I thought I had too, Jarn replied, testing the weight and balance of his war axe as he secured it at his belt. But some things you never truly leave behind. They just wait for when they're needed again. The armor fit differently than it had months ago. His body had changed during their time at the hall. Less of the lean hardness that came from constant campaigning, more of the solid strength that developed from honest physical labor. But the muscle memory remained, and as he moved in the familiar weight of iron and leather, he felt pieces of his old confidence returning. While Jarn prepared his weapons, Liv gathered supplies with the same methodical approach she brought to all tasks. Her movements were careful but determined as she collected bandages, healing herbs, and everything she might need if labor began during the coming conflict. She also prepared clean cloths and boiled water, creating a birthing space in the most protected corner of the hall. How long do we have? She asked as she worked. Difficult to say. If they're moving systematically, searching every possible hiding place, it could be days. If they have specific information about this location, he shrugged. It could be tonight. And if I go into labor while they're here? Jarn paused in his inspection of arrow points to look at her directly. Then you focus on bringing Freydis safely into the world and leave the rest to me. The simple confidence in his voice helped steady her nerves. This was a different man than the broken warrior who had arrived seeking only solitude and death. This was someone who had found a purpose worth fighting for, worth killing for, worth dying for if necessary. They spent the afternoon fortifying their position using the hall's natural advantages. The building had been constructed with defense in mind. Thick walls, limited access points, and clear sightlines to the surrounding forest. Jarn repositioned heavy furniture to create barriers, prepared fire arrows that could be launched from the windows, and set traps along the most likely approach routes. The foundation stone, Liv said suddenly as they worked. Should we move it to safety? Jarn looked at the ancient runestone they had uncovered, still positioned respectfully near the great hearth. No, it stays where it belongs. This place was blessed as a sanctuary, and that blessing will protect what needs protecting. As evening approached, they shared what might be their final peaceful meal together. The food tasted like ashes to both of them, but they ate mechanically, understanding they would need strength for whatever was coming. Their conversation was quiet, filled with the weight of things that might never be said again. "I need you to know something," Liv said as they finished eating. "These past months, building this life with you, it's been the happiest time of my life. Even with everything we've lost, everything we've suffered, I've never felt more complete than I do here." Jarn reached across to take her hand, noting how small and delicate it seemed within his own battle-scarred fingers. "You saved me," he said simply. "When I came here, I was already dead inside. You and Freydis brought me back to life. What happens if we survive?" Jarn interrupted gently but firmly. "We survive, and we raise Freydis in peace, and we grow old together, arguing about the proper way to smoke fish and whether she should learn to fight with sword or spear." Liv smiled despite her fear. "Both, obviously. A woman needs to be able to defend herself." "Obviously," Jarn agreed. And for a moment, their fear was overwhelmed by shared hope for a future that suddenly seemed possible again. The attack came with the first grey light of dawn. Jarn had positioned himself near the main window where he could observe the approaches to the hall. He had dozed fitfully through the night, trained to wake at the slightest unusual sound. It was the absolute silence that finally brought him fully alert, the kind of unnatural quiet that settles over a forest when predators move through it. He saw them emerging from the tree line like shadows given substance. 5 men, moving with the careful coordination of experienced warriors. Björn the Black was immediately recognizable. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the distinctive red cloak that had left its fragment as warning. The others spread out to surround the hall with practiced efficiency. "Liv," Jarn called softly. "And they're here." She was awake immediately, the instant alertness of someone who had lived with fear for months. "How many?" "5 that I can see. Probably more positioned where I can't observe them." Liv moved carefully to her prepared birthing area, gathering the supplies she might need. As she did, she gasped and doubled over, one hand pressed to her belly. "What's wrong?" Björn asked urgently. "The baby," she breathed. "I think the labor might be starting." The timing was impossible, terrifying, and somehow perfectly appropriate. As their enemies closed in for the final confrontation, new life insisted on making its entrance into the world. "How long do we have?" Jarn asked. "Hours, probably." "First babies take time." Liv straightened with visible effort. "I can manage. Do what you need to do." From outside came a voice that carried clearly through the morning air, cultured, confident, with the undertone of casual cruelty that marked truly dangerous men. "Liv Eriksdottir," Björn called. "I know you're in there. We found your little nest at last." Jarn positioned himself at the reinforced door, weapons ready. "What do you want?" he called back, not bothering to deny Liv's presence. "What I've always wanted. The girl and the bastard she carries. Hand them over, and you can walk away from this. You're not part of the political game that brought us here. The woman is under my protection," Jarn replied. "If you want her, you'll have to come through me." Björn's laughter rang through the forest. "1 man against 5? Poor odds, friend. Who are you to throw your life away for someone else's war?" "I'm Jarn Ormsson," he called back, pride returning to his voice for the first time since Stjernhol. "I'm her husband, and this is my home. You're not welcome here." The lie came naturally, establishing their relationship in terms these men would understand. In his heart, it didn't feel like a lie at all. "Jarn Ormsson," Björn repeated thoughtfully. "I know that name. You're the captain who led his entire crew to slaughter at Stjernhall. What makes you think you can protect anyone when you couldn't even protect your own men?" The words hit like physical blows, reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. Behind him, Jarn heard Liv's sharp intake of breath, pain from the labor beginning in earnest. "Because," Jarn called back, his voice steady despite the turmoil within, "this time I'm fighting for something that matters more than glory or silver. I'm fighting for my family." "How touching," Björn replied. "I'll be sure to mention your noble sacrifice when I report to my employer. But the girl still comes with me, alive or dead. Her choice. Through the window, Jarn could see two of the men moving to flank the hall while Björn kept him talking. Professional tactics, coordinated and efficient. These weren't raiders or common bandits, they were soldiers following a plan. Behind him, Liv groaned softly as another contraction seized her. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not, and Freydis would enter the world in the midst of violence and death. But she would enter it free, Jarn vowed silently. Whatever it cost him, whatever sacrifice was required, his daughter would be born free and live free. The word daughter echoed in his mind as he gripped his weapons and prepared for the fight that would determine whether their improvised family survived to see another dawn. Freydis was his daughter now in every way that mattered, and no one, not Björn the Black, not political conspirators, not the ghosts of his past failures, would take his family from him. The morning sun rose higher, burning away the last wisps of mist, as the most important battle of Jarn Ormsson's life was about to begin. The first burning arrow struck the hall's roof with a sound like thunder, followed immediately by 3 more in rapid succession. Jarn had expected this tactic. Fire was the most efficient way to force defenders from a fortified position, but the reality of watching their home begin to burn filled him with cold fury. Through the reinforced door, he could hear Björn shouting orders to his men. 2 of you keep the fire going. The rest with me when the door gives way. Remember, the woman alive, the man doesn't matter. From behind him came the sound that drove everything else from his mind, Liv crying out as another contraction seized her, stronger and closer together now. The baby was coming fast, too fast, and there was no time for the careful preparations they had planned. How long? He called over his shoulder, not taking his eyes from the window where he could see movement in the tree line. Soon, Liv gasped. Very soon. I can feel the baby coming. The first assault came as fire spread across the thatched roof above them. 2 men rushed the main door, while another sent arrows through the windows to keep Jarn pinned down. But he had spent months studying this hall's defenses, and he knew exactly where each attacker would have to position himself. The heavy oak door, reinforced with iron bands they had installed together, held against the initial rush. Jarn's first arrow took down the man trying to force the door. His second caught the archer before he could loose another shaft. 2 down, but smoke was beginning to fill the hall as the roof fire spread. The baby's coming now, Liv called urgently. Jarn, I need... Her words were lost in another cry of pain, and Jarn found himself torn between the battle raging outside and the miracle happening behind him. This was what he had trained for his entire adult life, protecting what mattered most, but no amount of military experience had prepared him for defending his family while his child was being born. Björn's voice cut through the chaos. Burn them out! I want that woman before the roof collapses. A crash from above indicated that part of the thatch had given way, sending sparks and burning debris into the hall. Jod grabbed a bucket of water they had prepared and doused the flames, but more were already starting. They had minutes before the hall became uninhabitable. The second wave came from 2 directions, simultaneously, the weakened door and a window that one of the attackers had managed to reach. Jarn met the door assault with his war axe, the familiar weight and balance feeling like an extension of his arm. The warrior who broke through was skilled, but Jarn fought with the desperate strength of a man protecting his newborn child. Behind him, over the sounds of battle, he heard something that stopped his heart. The thin, piercing cry of a baby taking her first breath. Freydis had entered the world in the midst of violence and smoke, her arrival marked by the clash of weapons and the crackle of flames. She's here, Liv called weakly. Jarn, she's beautiful. The sound of his daughter's cry gave Jarn strength he didn't know he possessed. His axe moved with deadly precision, driving back the attackers, creating space and time for his family to exist in safety for just a few moments longer. But Björn had been watching, waiting for exactly this moment of distraction. As Jarn fought off the coordinated assault, the black-cloaked warrior slipped through the gap in the door, moving with the fluid grace of a predator who had done this many times before. Touching, Björn said, his sword already drawn. A birth and a death on the same morning. How poetic! Jarn turned to face him, his axe dripping with the blood of the men who had tried to reach his family. Behind him, Liv clutched their newborn daughter, both of them vulnerable and dependent on his protection. "You won't touch them," Jarn said simply. "Won't I?" Björn smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "You're outnumbered, your home is burning, and you're already wounded." Jarn glanced down and saw blood seeping through his mail shirt where one of the earlier attackers had found a gap. "3 men down," Jarn replied. "Your odds aren't as good as they were." Björn's smile widened. "But I'm still standing, aren't I? And I haven't even drawn blood yet." The roof groaned ominously above them, and another section of burning thatch crashed down nearby. The hall was filling with smoke, making it difficult to breathe and harder to see clearly. Soon they would have to evacuate regardless of the tactical situation. "Last chance," Björn offered. "Give me the woman and child, and I'll make your death quick. Keep fighting, and I'll make sure you live long enough to watch what I do to them." From behind him, Jarn heard Freydis crying, not the weak mewling of a sickly infant, but the strong, angry protest of a healthy child demanding better treatment from the world. His daughter was a fighter, just like her mother. "Come and take them," Jarn said, raising his axe. Björn the Black had killed jarls and kings, had never failed to complete a contract, had built his reputation on being the most efficient killer in the northern kingdoms. But as he looked across the burning hall at the man who stood between him and his target, something in Jarn Ormsson's stance made him reconsider his tactics. This wasn't going to be as easy as he had expected. The final confrontation began with Björn moving forward in the measured steps of a master swordsman, his blade catching the firelight as smoke swirled around them. Jarn shifted his grip on his war axe, feeling the familiar weight that had been his companion through 20 years of warfare. But this time, every movement was informed by something deeper than training or experience. This time, he fought as a father protecting his newborn child. Behind him, Freydis continued her strong crying, the sound piercing through the chaos like a battle horn announcing that new life had arrived and would not be silenced. Liv's voice, weak but determined, whispered soothing words to their daughter, creating a pocket of tenderness in the midst of violence. Björn struck first, his sword moving in a precise arc aimed at Jarn's wounded side. The blade was expertly crafted, lighter and faster than the heavy weapons Jarn was accustomed to facing. But Jarn's axe intercepted the blow with a ringing clash of steel on steel. And his counterattack came immediately, a horizontal sweep that would have taken Björn's head if the smaller man hadn't ducked with predatory grace. "You fight well for a broken man," Björn observed, circling to find a better angle of attack. "But skill fades with age and doubt. You're not the warrior you once were." "You're right," Jarn admitted, watching his opponent's movements with the careful attention of someone who understood that one mistake would be fatal. "I'm not the same man who failed at Stjernhall. I'm someone better." The psychological warfare was part of Björn's method, undermine the opponent's confidence while seeking physical advantages. But Jarn had spent months rebuilding himself from the ruins of his old identity. The shame and self-doubt that had nearly destroyed him had been transformed into something stronger through love and purpose. Björn's second attack was a feint, followed by a thrust toward Jarn's center mass, a combination that had killed many skilled opponents. But Jarn read the deception and turned it aside, his axe blade sliding along Björn's sword to strike the man's shoulder. The blow was partially deflected by good armor, but it drew first blood and proved that the legendary killer was not invincible. "Clever," Björn acknowledged, stepping back to reassess. "But I have advantages you don't." As if summoned by his words, 2 more warriors appeared at the broken doorway, the remainder of his force having finished their work of surrounding the burning hall. Fresh opponents, while Jarn was already bloodied and breathing hard from smoke and exertion. But as the new attackers moved forward, something unexpected happened. Freydis's crying, which had been continuous since her birth, suddenly intensified into the kind of piercing wail that demands immediate attention from every adult within hearing. The sound was so purely, desperately alive that it seemed to transform the very air around them. One of the approaching warriors hesitated, his face showing confusion at the presence of a newborn in what should have been a simple assassination. In that moment of uncertainty, Jarn struck with renewed fury, his axe taking the man down before he could recover his focus. The sight of their companion falling caused the second warrior to pause, and Liv's voice rose above the chaos. "Look at what you're doing," she called out, holding baby Freydis where the attackers could see her. "You've come to murder a newborn child." Is that what warriors have become? The remaining fighter, young, perhaps new to this kind of work, stared at the scene with growing horror. A woman who had just given birth, covered in blood and exhaustion, holding an infant barely minutes old. The reality of their contract, the true nature of what they had been hired to do, struck him with visible force. "This isn't right," he said, lowering his weapon. "I didn't sign on to kill babies." Björn's composure cracked for the first time. "You signed on to follow orders," he snarled. "Finish this!" But the young warrior was backing toward the door, shaking his head. "Find someone else for your child killing. I'm done." He disappeared into the morning light, leaving Björn alone to face Jarn in the burning hall. The legendary assassin's reputation had just taken a severe blow, and both men knew it. "Seems your reputation for inspiring loyalty isn't what it used to be," Jarn observed. Björn's response was a savage attack, his sword work becoming more aggressive and less controlled, as anger replaced his earlier cold professionalism. This was exactly what Jarn had hoped for, a skilled opponent fighting with emotion rather than tactical precision. Their weapons met in a series of exchanges that rang through the hall like hammer blows on an anvil. Sparks flew where steel met steel, and both men pressed their attacks with the desperate intensity of fighters who knew the battle would be decided in the next few moments. The roof groaned again, and a massive section of burning timbers crashed down behind them, blocking any retreat through the main door. Now they were all trapped, Jarn, Liv, baby Freydis and Björn, in a burning hall that was rapidly becoming uninhabitable. "We all die together," Björn laughed, pressing his attack with renewed fury. "At least I'll complete half my contract." But Jarn was no longer listening to threats or taunts. His entire world had narrowed to the simple truth that his family needed him to win this fight. Everything else, his past failures, his fear of death, his concern for his own survival, fell away in the face of that absolute necessity. Freydis cried out again, and the sound gave him the strength for one final, decisive blow. 3 weeks after the battle, the forest clearing held no traces of violence or death. Where smoke had once risen from burning timbers, morning mist now drifted peacefully between the trees. The hall stood restored and strengthened, its new thatch bright gold in the autumn sunlight, its foundation stone gleaming clean beside the rebuilt hearth. Jarn sat on the wooden stool he had carved months ago, holding his daughter while Liv prepared their morning meal. Freydis was growing stronger every day, her eyes already showing the intelligence that would mark her as her mother's child. She had her father's steady disposition, but her mother's quick alertness to everything around her. "She's going to be trouble," Liv observed, watching as the baby grabbed Jarn's finger with surprising strength. "Look how she studies everything. She's planning something." "Good," Jarn replied, gently stroking his daughter's downy hair. "The world needs more women who make plans." The new wooden cradle sat beside their rebuilt bed, its smooth curves catching the firelight. It was the third piece of furniture Jarn had crafted for their home. The first had been lost in the fire, the second he'd made quickly for Freydis's first days of life. This one was built to last for generations, carved with protective runes and lined with the softest wool they could find. "The merchant will be here soon," Liv said, stirring honey into their porridge. "Are you certain about what we're going to tell him?" They had agreed on their story during the long, quiet days of recovery. Jarn and Liv Ormsson, refugees from the raids in the south, had claimed this abandoned hall and were working to make it productive again. Their daughter had been born here, making her a child of the sanctuary with no ties to the political upheavals that had cost so many lives. Simple stories are the most believable, Jarn replied. Besides, it's mostly true now, the transformation had been remarkable to witness. Liv had taken Jarn's family name without ceremony or celebration, simply beginning to use it in conversation, as if they had always been married. The legal formalities could wait. In their hearts, and in the eyes of anyone who mattered, they were already bound together by something stronger than contracts or ceremonies. Old Magnus from the village had been the first to visit, drawn by curiosity about the smoke he'd seen and the stories of fighting in the forest. He'd found a young family peacefully working their land, the woman nursing her baby while the man repaired winter damage to their home. The bodies of Björn and his men had already been buried in unmarked graves far from the hall, their presence erased from the world as completely as their threat had been eliminated. Terrible business. "Those raids," Magnus had said, accepting their explanation without question. "But you've made something good here. The old hall was always meant to shelter people who needed protecting. They had decided to stay rather than attempt to reclaim Liv's family lands. The political situation remained dangerous and complex, and they had no desire to thrust Freydis into a world where her bloodline made her a target. Here, in their forgotten corner of the forest, she could grow up free from the weight of inherited conflicts. What will we tell her?" Liv asked one evening as they watched their daughter sleep. "About who she really is." "The truth," Jarn had replied, "that she comes from good people who were brave and honorable. That her grandfather was a man of integrity who died defending what he believed in. That her mother survived against impossible odds to give her life. And about you? About us?" Jarn considered carefully. "That sometimes the most important family is the one you choose. That love can grow from the most unlikely circumstances. That two broken people can heal each other and create something beautiful together." Now, weeks later, as they prepared to trade with the outside world for the first time since the battle, those words felt prophetic. They had indeed created something beautiful, not just Freydis, but an entire life built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the kind of deep affection that grows slowly but lasts forever. The merchant, when he arrived, saw exactly what they wanted him to see: a hard-working family making the best of challenging circumstances. He bought their surplus herbs and preserved foods, sold them supplies they needed for the approaching winter, and shared news from the wider world without showing any particular interest in their personal history. "Jarl Eriksson's rule is secure in Nordberg," he mentioned casually as they concluded their business. "The old Jarl's supporters have mostly accepted the new order or disappeared entirely." Jarn and Liv exchanged glances but said nothing. Let the wider world believe that particular threat had been eliminated. Their silence protected not just themselves, but Freydis's future freedom. That evening, as their first winter together approached, they sat by the fire with their daughter between them. The hall felt completely different than it had when Jarn first arrived, seeking solitude and death. Every corner held evidence of their shared life, tools they had made together, furniture carved for their specific needs, bundles of herbs that would see them through the cold months ahead. "Do you ever regret it?" Liv asked quietly. "Giving up the possibility of returning to your old life?" Jarn looked around their home, then down at Freydis, sleeping peacefully in his arms. "What old life?" he asked. "This is the only life that matters." Outside, the forest settled into its winter rhythm. Inside the ancient sanctuary, three people who had found each other against all odds, prepared to face whatever challenges the future might bring. They had learned that home wasn't a place you were born to, but something you built with the people you chose to love. Freydis stirred in her sleep, making the small sounds that never failed to fill her parents with wonder. She was growing up surrounded by the kind of love and security that would give her the strength to face anything the world might demand of her. As the fire burned low and peaceful sleep approached, Jarn understood that his father's pendant had been right all along. Worthiness didn't come from avoiding failure or achieving glory in battle. It came from using whatever strength you had to protect what mattered most, to build something good that would outlast your own brief time in the world. In the morning, there would be work to do, winter preparations to complete, and a daughter to raise with wisdom and love. But tonight, there was only contentment and the quiet satisfaction of a broken man who had found his way to wholeness through the simple act of caring for others more than himself.